The excitement that reigned at the Château de Saint-Cloud on the 9th of July 1750 reached its peak at 8:15 in the evening, when the Duke and Duchess of Chartres became the parents of a daughter whose birth was received with love and happiness. As her mother was descended from Louis XIV and her father from Philip of France, Louise Marie Thérèse Bathilde was thus a princess of the blood. When Princess Bathilde was about 2 years old, her grandfather, Louis, Duke of Orléans, who had wished not to die without bidding farewell to his 2 grandchildren, requested to have them brought to him. On seeing his granddaughter, the Duke of Orléans embraced her and said, "Poor child, may you be as happy as you will be good and caring." Addressing his grandson, the young Duke of Montpensier, the dying man exclaimed, "For you I have nothing to wish." Astonished by this reserve, the audience interpreted this as an ominous sign. Upon his father's death in February 1752, the Duke of Chartres became Duke of Orléans, first Prince of the Blood, and his son exchanged the title of Duke of Montpensier for that of Duke of Chartres, as heir presumptive of the younger branch of the royal house of France. 7 years later, when the Duchess of Orléans was unable to shake off a persistent fever, she found herself lying on her deathbed. As her last thoughts turned to her children, the Duchess spoke first to her 12-year-old son, advising him not to forget his duties as a prince and to guard against his exaggerated opinion of himself. To her charming 9-year-old daughter, who possessed precocious qualities, the Duchess of Orléans believed that warm embraces would be enough. Shortly after, Bathilde was sent to a boarding school where she devoted herself to study and prayer. She loved history, drawing, and music, and was particularly talented at playing the harpsichord, which she mastered very well. On Christmas Eve in 1763, the court of Versailles was pleasantly surprised by the arrival of a family composed of musical prodigies. Describing the occasion in a letter to a friend, Leopold Mozart said, "My children have taken almost everyone by storm. Today my little girl was given a small transparent snuff-box inlaid with gold from Princess Carignan. My boy Wolfgang got a pocket-writing case in silver with silver pens with which to write his compositions. If the recognition we receive equals the pleasure which my children have given this court, we ought to do very well. My little girl plays the most difficult works with incredible precision. At present, 4 sonatas of Master Wolfgang Mozart are being engraved. Picture to yourself the furore which they will make in the world when people read on the title page that they have been composed by a 7-year-old child." By the spring of the following year, the Mozart family was able to give 2 concerts in Paris with the help of the Duke of Chartres. Realizing that his sister would take great pleasure in meeting young Mozart and his family, the Duke of Chartres took them to visit the nunnery where Bathilde was staying. A small concert was given for her, and after they left, the 13-year-old princess composed a little piece for the clavier which she dedicated to Master Wolfgang. When the Mozart family returned to see Bathilde again, she offered her composition to young Mozart. During the following years she spent in the convent to complete her education, the princess would be allowed from time to time to return to the Palais Royal, to Saint-Cloud and to Versailles in order to take part at various family gatherings. In the spring of 1769, when the Duke of Chartres married Mademoiselle de Penthièvre, Princess Bathilde left her convent in order to attend the wedding of her brother. On this occasion, the enthusiasm shown to her by her cousin, the Duke of Bourbon, was not to her displeasure. Before long, he persuaded the princess that they were destined to make the journey of life together, and declared that he wanted to be her husband. As both of them were motherless and tenderly loved by their respective fathers, the Duke of Orléans and the Prince of Condé, Princess Bathilde and the Duke of Bourbon received their parents' blessing, and a year later, with the king's consent, they celebrated their wedding at Versailles. But as the Duke of Bourbon was not 16 yet, it was decided that he would travel and Bathilde would return to her convent. Nevertheless, love emboldened the young Duke of Bourbon, and in a short while he climbed the walls of his wife's convent, and, with a Condé-like audacity, he carried her away. The couple settled at Chantilly, the favourite residence of the Condé, where Bathilde's father-in-law had a splendid castle. But it didn't take long for the Duke of Bourbon to break the oath of love that bound him to Bathilde. He gave himself up to the excitement of the loose morals of Versailles, and began to change his mistresses as often as his horses. However, a brief return of tenderness for his wife resulted in the birth of an heir to the house of Condé. The couple's son, Louis-Antoine Henri Duc d'Enghien, had a dramatic entry into the world. As he was born tiny and almost without breath, the doctors suggested that he should be wrapped in swaddling clothes soaked in wine spirit. Yet he remained frozen, so in order to revive him, he was put before a large fireplace. A spark flying over him set fire to the inflammable clothes with which he was swaddled. If his parents hadn't succeeded in pulling them out, the little prince wouldn't have survived. Seeing how her unfaithful husband continued to fall endlessly into the arms of various dancers and actresses, was a source of bitterness for the Duchess of Bourbon. Disappointed as a wife, she felt the need to express her unhappiness. So one day the Duchess took up the pen and wrote a theatre play mocking the behavior of her husband. Following the performance of this play at Chantilly, the Duchess went to spend a few days in Paris, but as she was preparing to return, she received a letter from her husband telling her that she could dispense with returning there, as he was irritated by the satire directed against him. Pushed away from the conjugal home, the Duchess implored not to be too harshly removed from her adored son. She would only be allowed to see him once a week. Once, when her son took leave of her, the Duchess couldn't hold back her tears and said, "My dear child, love your mother very much, although you see her so rarely." To which the Duc d'Enghien replied, "Be reassured, madame, is she not always present in my heart?" To distract her mind from her unfortunate situation, the Duchess read a great deal, painted, played the harp, deciphered new scores on her harpsichord, and attended to her correspondence. Marie Antoinette, who appreciated her talents, invited the Duchess of Bourbon to the salon of the Marquise d'Ossat, where an art centre was created. Music was especially appreciated there, and every week brought a concert where the virtuosity of the Duchess of Bourbon was a great success. But the main object of Bathilde's thoughts was charity. Her overabundant generosity made her ask the clergy of her parish, her relatives, often even her servants, to point out to her the sufferings of the poor. She would then spare no effort in finding them in order to bring relief to those unfortunate souls. When the Duke of Chartres accepted the office of Grand Master of Freemasonry, the Duchess of Chartres lost no time in pleasing her husband and joined the order amid brilliant festivities that thrilled the Parisians. Delighted by the effect produced, the Duke of Chartres advised his sister and his sister-in-law to follow the example of his wife. The Duchess of Bourbon and the Princess of Lamballe allowed themselves to be influenced by the beautiful words of this seducer, and were admitted to the order with the same pomp and circumstance which had been displayed in honour of the Duchess of Chartres. Later, when the Duchess of Bourbon spoke to her friend Madame de Berkirch, she said, "I am very fond of my sister-in-law. She is perfect. But my brother, he will dishonour his family. I see it in my dreams. I cannot say all that I think, for I should only be considered mad. But I feel a presentiment that he will commit high treason and perish on a scaffold." When her father died, Bathilde inherited a vast fortune, which allowed her to buy a splendid Parisian residence that Louis XVI had once acquired with the intention of accommodating the ambassadors of foreign sovereigns. As the king became concerned about the disarray of the state's finances, he sold the Élysée Palace to Bathilde. This palace became a retreat for the Duchess, where she would invite her son to dinner and often paint his portrait. But soon the 18th century was about to end in unrest and disquiet. When the Bastille, the emblem of royal authority, crumbled under the fury of the Revolution, the Prince of Condé ran to Versailles and for 2 days, on the 15th and the 16th of July 1789, begged Louis XVI not to obey the orders of the revolutionaries. As he was not successful in his attempt, the Prince of Condé was forced to leave the kingdom with his son and grandson. They settled on the other side of the Rhine, where the Prince of Condé would organize the army of the émigrés in order to oppose the revolution. In the midst of these terrible circumstances, the Duchess of Bourbon was unable to say goodbye to her 17-year-old son and remained in France. Her brother, who declared himself the champion of the revolution, remained in the Palais Royal and made it the refuge of all the supporters of the new regime. By that time, the Duchess of Bourbon, who had embraced liberal ideas, believed that a republic was better suited to solve the ills of France. Moreover, she declared, There should be no distinction among people except that which virtue, spirit, talents, and education should establish. About Bathilde, Madame de Berkirch said, "Her political opinions are inclined to be democratic, rather strange in a princess of her family." Seeing no danger in staying in France, Bathilde said she would not emigrate. But this illusion quickly disappeared. The events of the 10th of August, 1792, when the revolutionaries invaded the Tuileries, made Bathilde write from Petit-Bourg to the Princess of Lamballe, saying, "I have just learned, my princess, all the new misfortunes arrived in Paris. I would have liked to go and present myself before the King and the Queen in these sad circumstances, but the fear of being locked up in Paris stops me. Please be so kind as to tell them the content of my letter and to give me news of the whole royal family as well as of yours. I will not add anything. Words are too feeble to express all that the heart feels in such circumstances." A few weeks later, the Princess of Lamballe fell victim to the fury of the revolutionaries. As she was lying lifeless in the street, someone picked up the wallet fallen from her clothes. Through the blood which stained the letter found inside, one could read the words that Bathilde had written to the unfortunate princess. In such circumstances, the Duchess remained at the Château de Petit-Bourg, hoping she would be forgotten. But on the morning of the 4th of April, 1793, the defection of General Dumouriez to the Austrians provoked anger and indignation among the revolutionaries. As Louis-Philippe d'Orléans, aide-de-camp to the general, had crossed the border with him, the National Convention said that happened because his father, the new Duke of Orléans, had provoked this double treason. Without further delay, the Convention decreed that all the members of the Orléans family would be imprisoned. Bathilde was taken from Petit-Bourg and held in the La Force prison. From there she was transferred to a prison in Marseille, where she was detained with her brother and 2 of his sons. After her brother was executed in November 1793, the Duchess resigned herself to her fate. "One day, while I was praying," she said, "it occurred to me that the Convention was only after my fortune, and that if I donated it to the poor, it would be pleasing to God, and would make me less frightening to those who were only after my money. This thought seemed to be sent to me from heaven." But the Convention had already seized her assets and decided to bring her before the revolutionary court. Miraculously, the fall of Robespierre saved the princess from the scaffold. However, her release from prison was only a short pause offered to her misfortune. As the presence in France of the members of the royal family was considered dangerous for the security of the state, the Directory ordered their deportation. The Duchess of Bourbon and her sister-in-law were exiled to Spain. All these dramatic events had broken Bathilde's soul, but through this opening, slowly, God was going to make His grace known to her. As the zeal for religion and the search for the happiness of humankind would become her guiding force, the Duchess dedicated her time to those around her and opened a pharmacy for the poor. When Napoleon showed a favorable disposition with regard to a certain category of exiles, the Duchess hoped to be recalled to France. In a letter to a friend, she expressed her enthusiasm for the first consul and said, "I consider him as a faithful instrument of the powerful cause which makes him act, and I often ask God to enlighten him with his true light for the happiness of mankind and to carry out his supreme will." Meanwhile, in Ettenheim, a village in the territory of Baden, the Duc d'Enghien was abducted from his home and arrested on Napoleon's orders. As he was accused of being involved in a conspiracy against the life of the first consul, the Duke protested and said, "Soldiers of my race, fight, but do not assassinate." He asked to be seen by Napoleon in order to prove that he was innocent, which was the truth, but his request was refused. The Duke was taken to the Château de Vincennes and brought before a military commission who condemned him to death. On the morning of the 21st of March, 1804, he was led to a trench of the castle and shot by a detachment of gendarmes. The Duke's dog, which had followed him into the moat, yelled when he saw his master fall, and threw itself over his body. The poor animal lingered on the spot for some time before it was dragged away with great difficulty. The Duc d'Enghien kept the memory of his mother so faithfully that when he was condemned to death, he still carried with him a portrait miniature of the Duchess of Bourbon. A few weeks later, the Duke of Bourbon wrote from England to the Duchess, saying, "It is with death in my soul that I must tell you how much I share your pain. Our good and dear child no longer exists. The tears suffocate me. I mix them with those of a mother, and that is all to say. Arm yourself with all the courage you can find to endure the greatest, the most terrible of all misfortunes." After a while, the Duchess wrote to Napoleon, whom she never ceased to admire, and begged him to end her miserable exile. But the Emperor, comfortably installed at Saint-Cloud, where Bathilde had spent the most beautiful years of her life, turned his ears away from the pleas of the mother of the Duc d'Enghien. Years passed without any change in the sad life of the Duchess of Bourbon, and every evening she was seen going for a walk on the road to France. But in 1814, Napoleon's radiant star was beginning to fade, and in April of that year, when he was sent into exile, Bathilde's return to France became reality after 17 long and painful years. When the Duchess reached the capital of the kingdom of her ancestors, she found Louis XVIII and the royal family installed in the Tuileries. As she couldn't take back possession of the Élysée, the king offered her instead the Hôtel de Matignon. In her new home, she set up a hospice for old and infirm people who would be cared for at the expense of the generous Duchess. She named this charitable establishment the Enghien Hospice because it occupied in her heart the place that her son once held there. Harmonious relations were established between the Duchess and her husband, but they decided to live independently. As it turned out, Bathilde never ceased to love her husband. In a letter to a friend, she said, "The change and distress in which I saw the Duke of Bourbon touched me to the core, and I only regret that I am no longer at an age where I could have made his life sweet by giving him another son. One day in January 1822, the Duchess was taking part in a religious service at the church of Sainte Geneviève when she suddenly started feeling unwell. In a matter of seconds, she turned pale and collapsed. Before she joined the procession, the person who was accompanying the Duchess asked her if all was fine with her. To that, the Duchess replied, "I have never been better. Prayer alone gives me strength. It is a consolation to me, and I only wish that God would deign to call me to himself while I am praying to him." She died as she had wished. The Duke of Bourbon died in tragic circumstances 8 years later.